Greetings, everyone. I am so thrilled to again be in conversation with Veda Austin. And let me just give a brief bio and description of her work, and then we're going to be in conversation together. But thank you for being here today, Veda.
Oh, it's always a pleasure.
So, Veda is a water researcher, artist, and author who has spent 10 years observing and photographing water. And she sees water as source, not a resource, and as fluid intelligence with its own language, which she has observed through her work with crystallography and the discovery of hydroglyphs. She lives and works in New Zealand and is coming out with a new book that is extraordinary called The Living Language of Water that will be coming out hopefully within the next few months. And I'll list your website below so people can keep track of that. But thank you for being here, and I'm really excited to get into conversation with some of what you've included in that book about the language of water.
Well, I'm excited too because it has been like this baby finally getting ready to be birthed, and there's so much in there. And so to be able to have a book, I think, where people are able to show other people, oh, this is what she was talking about. This is what I mean. Like actually also to absorb the imagery and really sit with the conversation of water from new perspectives. And there's a lot to absorb. So having a physical book is going to make a big difference to a lot of people so far as their ability to absorb a lot of the information that I've been sharing over the many, many years, and probably a lot of new things that I've thrown in there that people may well not have ever seen before.
And if I can say this, Veda, part of what impacted me reading the proof of the book is your work really changes the way that we understand water, and it changes the way then we understand ourselves and the universe. And part of what's extraordinary in the book is you're also making it accessible for people to tap into their own experience with water and their own capacity to communicate with water. So you're really opening us up to that direct experience with the consciousness of water.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's an interesting concept, even saying consciousness of water, because there's so many concepts around that. Is water conscious? Is our consciousness impacting the water? Or is it that consciousness flows through the water and is an endless flow through life, through life, through life? It's something of which I don't 100% know. And I also think that there within the knowings that of ancient wisdom, of things that water has shown me and revealed to me through the imagery, what and my own experiences, for me personally, it feels like water and consciousness are so intimately intertwined that they literally behave as one.
Mm,
And I like
that's
the
a good point.
idea or concept that Isabel Friend shared with me, that hydrogen is the spirit of water and plasma is the mind of water, and that water is the uh, body that houses the spirit of water. And the idea of hydrogen, meaning the creator of water, is a really interesting concept when you think about how the sun there's a hydrogen and water evaporates. It's like source bringing all its children back home.
Well, and when
uh,
you think about how much hydrogen is what fills the universe,
yes.
so it is the spirit of water surrounding all that is, out of which all life emerges.
Mhm. Well, I also find it fascinating that in the Bible and in various religious and philosophical beliefs, but specifically this line in the Bible, it talks about the Spirit of God. The Spirit of God hovered over the face of the deep, which was the water, the ancient ocean or the abyss. And then from there, there was the sound, the word, and that's like a cymatic wave. And so and then creation began. But the spirit of water hovered over the face of the deep. It's that fascinates me, that particular sort of sentence.
Hmm.
So there's a lot there, and there's a lot to dive into, but I'm really excited about our topic or topics today that we discussed before hopping on, because I haven't talked about it so much in a lot of my podcasts, and I think it's really fun. I'm preempting you to talk about what is it going to be? What are we going to talk about?
So let's start with water and dreams,
That sounds
because
like
that part of the book absolutely fascinated me. And it led to a conversation before we got on the recording that I think would be great to get into more about how it is that the images that come through with water from dreams are so clear.
yeah, that fascinated me. So I'll bring it back to why I started working with water and dreams and what I did. The reason I started doing this was because I was asking the question, is water conscious, or is my consciousness impacting the water, or is it something else? So I was thinking, well, when am I not really actively conscious? And I was like, well, when I'm dreaming or when I'm asleep. And I thought, well, maybe that's a subconscious in action, but what will water do if it will do anything? So for nearly 4 months, I was staying in a place called Lang's Beach, which is in a quite remote, where I was staying on a big farm right in front of the ocean. It was, I was very isolated in many ways. So, and I found I was dreaming a lot. And thought, well, this is a good time. I have a long stretch of time to do this work. So what I would do is I'd put a petri dish of water by my bed, simply with the intention that it would capture some part of my dream. I dream in complete darkness. A lot of people say, do you need light for the water to have an imprint? So in this particular situation, it was in darkness. Now, in the morning, when you dream and you've dreamt and you kind of have a memory of it when you wake up, but then it starts just going away, and then a few seconds later, you've forgotten the whole thing. Those were the only times that I would freeze the water. Because if I remembered the dream, I would easily project my dream into the water and freeze it, and then it might be just part of my actual
Oh,
conscious projection. So
beautiful.
for the dreams that I knew I'd dreamed but forgot, I would immediately wake up, rush to the freezer, which was like just right close by, and I would freeze it using my freezing technique. And then I would photograph it afterwards. Now, here's where it really was fascinating to me, was that the imagery in the ice was so unbelievably clear, and we're going to show some photos just so you can see that it literally would jog my memory of the whole dream. And you know how you only need one thing to jog your memory of a whole dream? Well, these ice images did that for me. And so then I recorded the whole dream and the whole process. And one example was, because I was living on this farm, it was lambing season. So there was lots of lambs running around, and my subconscious had picked up on them. And plus, I thought they were really adorable. And so I was dreaming about sheep. And so one of the images was like this sheep, this cute, kind of almost cartoon-like, but clear little sheep with these really adorable little eyes. And I'm like, oh, that looks like a sheep. And then that just jogged to the memory. And so time after time after time, over, months, I recorded my dreams if my memory was jogged from the crystallography. So that poses the question then, how can water accompany me through the dream time? Uh, and I think that poses the question, is what is water? And so we were talking earlier about a concept that I found like kind of very new, this new idea around water and dreams. And you were talking about how clear they were. And I was saying to you, the clarity of the crystallography seemed almost clearer each time than in my waking state. And then you mentioned something about, even within the Aboriginal tribes, um, thinking that actually the dream time is the real time, and what we are experiencing now is a dream,
Mm.
and that the crystallography is so clear in the dream time. That's what surprised me. And when in the book you'll see the comparisons of all of the thousands of photos I've taken in this realm, and then the images that I've shared in the dream time. So I'm very happy to share some if you'd like.
Oh, yes. Let's look at them. I think
Have
this
a
is amazing.
look. So hopefully, can you see this okay?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so this is just part of my actual book. So I'm talking about what I did here. And so these images, let's just have a look at them here. And I've dated the days I had the dreams too. So you can see the railway tracks. I mean, they're very clear. I did a tiny little exercise where I just had that one picture and I showed it to a bunch of different people. And I said, what does this look like to you? And everyone said it looks like railway tracks.
It's crystal clear.
Very clear. And then the butterfly, so the focal point of the dream was a glowing butterfly that helped me find my way through a dark tunnel. And so I love how it's got, if we look at it, so it looks just like a monarch butterfly's wings with this kind of glow on the edge. And then this one, I was watching Netflix, and I was watching a show called Sweet Tooth, which is kind of about these hybrid children that were born, and they were part human and part animal. And in the introduction, there is this part where there is a part lion, part human baby, and it looks just like this guy here. So with the long nose, this kind of lion mouth, and there's the eye and the whiskers and everything. And I haven't put the comparison with this one to the actual Netflix image just because of copyright reasons. I haven't done that in the book. So anyone that watches wants to check it out and compare it, you can just a Google away. So let's move on from this one. Oops, move that out of the way and see if why is it not doing that? Oh, there we go. So this is my little sheep guy.
Oh, that's great.
And it's amazing. I mean, look at the way it's designed, this cute little sheep, and the outline of the body and the colors and the little eyes. Um,
And I have to say, Veda, seeing so many of your other images, these are so much more distinct in many ways and clear.
yeah, well, this one's one of my favorites. So I'm going to read the dream for you all, and then we can have a look and see why it's so interesting and cool. So I dreamt that I went to the center of I have some very, very vivid dreams. People have often told me I have a very vivid imagination when it comes to my dreams, but I've always thought my dreams have been a guiding light to a lot of things. So I dreamt I went to the center of the world and entered a cave that had a sacred pool of water. And somehow I knew it was like the real fountain of youth, but I hadn't gone there for that, and I hadn't got any intention of going in the pool. So in the inner sanctum of the cave was a rock, and I sat on the rock and I looked out of the cave entrance at the stars and the moon, and then I turned around and looked down into the water. And what was interesting, even in my dream, was there appeared to be a fountain reflected, but no fountain above. So what I was looking at down in the pool was a fountain like that was moving, but it wasn't above the water. So it was like an inside fountain upside down. And if you look here at the actual pictures, so here we have the original picture this way up. So here's the cave entrance, there's the moon and the little stars, and it looks like a little planet there. And then here's the rock that I was sitting on, and here's this kind of water. But if you tip it upside down, here's the fountain that
Hmm,
I, and
extraordinary.
and then the whole thing is upside down. So This particular imagery, I think there's a lot more we could discuss about the symbology of it. But it's also extremely clear, because this is how I remember it looked in my dream. It's not like it just resembles it. This is like how it looked in my dream. This one was one of the earlier ones I did. So I was dreaming that I was on a boat in really high waters. Yeah, so with this dream, it's quite transparent, really. You can see the outline of the boat here with the sail and these big waves. And I think it's very symbolic of how I was feeling. I was feeling very turbulent in my life at the time. And so the water was very showing my emotions all up and down. And I'm just somehow managing to stay afloat in the boat, which was a relief. So this one also very clear when you understand the dream. And there was this big war had gone on, and we were in this aftermath of the war, and the whole dream felt kind of smoky or hazy or foggy a little bit in the way in which I walked into it. And I mean, as in like this, like walked into looking at the dream, if you know what I mean, as an observer. So I was flying around and above this fort, and everything felt sort of heavy, I suppose. It felt like something had just happened. And there was this big kind of griffin, like lion statue thing beside the tower. And there was water flowing over and down over this statue of the lion. And I kept hearing this voice saying Tower of Strength over and over and over. But the whole energy of it felt foggy
Mm.
as you kind of were moving through. It felt thick. And so here we have this tower, this griffiny thing, and the kind of waterfally thing. And it captured some of the essence of that dream to me. Then this one, super clear. So this was a dream where, oops, let's go back to that. I was in a forest, and I heard this cute squeaky little meowy noise. And I was looking around, and I found this little baby creature that looked a little bit like a cross between a cat and an otter. And it had like super silky fur, and it was really cute. And I picked it up and I went to help it find its mother. And finally I came to her, and she was lying like a cat with little kittens, and they were all drinking from it, the mum. And I just put the baby back. And watched them feeding for a while. And so this one, there's some there's some images that I get that I don't share. And one of the reasons I don't share them is because people wouldn't even believe that they were real. And this is one of those ones where it really looks like a cat or a creature. And I felt like this image very very clearly depicts my dream.
Mm.
This was one where I was dreaming that I went to a retirement home, and there was an elderly Samoan woman there and in a wheelchair, and she beckoned me over and we had a conversation. And she wanted me to help her put her hair up, her long white hair up into a bun. And she gave me two hairpins that she said that her grandmother had given her, and one had an oval shape and one had a circle shape. And so, you know, these pins in
Mm.
the ice imagery are
Amazing.
extremely clear, and not something I typically see either, I would say. There are some images that I see, it's like their signature patterns of ice, where you kind of see, okay, and then they identify the different patterns of water, of types of water, sorry, through patterning. And then you can see hydroglyphs, which are specific shapes, and then you have art. And so these are quite unique in the way that they are designed. Let's see what next one I have. This one I shared on social media because I have a video of it, but I just couldn't share the video, obviously, in a book, in the physical book. But the dream was lovely, and quite deep. And I tend to have very deep and meaningful dreams. Sometimes I get quite exhausted from my dreams, I think. But I dreamt that I was in darkness and I couldn't move freely. But I knew I was in the earth somehow, and I wasn't scared, even though I felt like I was all tightly packed in. And the dirt held me in the darkness. And after a while, I saw that the little worms gave off a slight glow. I often wondered if worms actually do give off a kind of little
Mhm.
bioluminescence in the ground. And after a while, I felt something wrap my arm around my arm and begin lifting me upwards. And it felt like I was being lifted for a really long time until I burst through the ground and kept moving upwards. And finally, I stopped. And when I looked at my arm, I saw that I was held by a tree branch and I was sitting on top of the sacred tree of life. And I saw, and I knew that it was the tree of life because it told me so. It said, I am the sacred tree of life, and you are my daughter, and your name is Seed. And
Mhm.
and the tree then gently lowered me down to the ground, and I began walking towards the stream that ran nearby. I turned to say goodbye, and my tree mother swayed and sang to me. And so this was on my birthday. So July the 11th was a very special,
It's
special,
an exquisite dream.
very special. You know, I was researching about seeds because they play a big, consistent role throughout my Ancient Mysteries webinar that I'm about to give. I don't know when this is coming out. I may have given it by then. Uh, because seeds, I have a hydroglyph for the word seed. And the seeds, even seeds when they've been stored in packets for years, they still retain about 10% water inside of them. And I think it's the water that stores and holds the potential, the memory, the potential of the seed as a complete tree. Okay. Now I can't, maybe I won't go into every single dream. Maybe people might be able to, and this is a new one I added in because I had to add an extra page in. So you might want to know about this last one. So this one is that my car had broken down and I had to walk to the nearest town, and I was walking for hours and no cars went past me. And I began to sing a song out loud, and it was called, the song by John Denver called Country Road. And I was
Mhm.
like singing away. And I wasn't in New Zealand, but the way the fence posts and the fields and stuff were designed, it just reminded me of New Zealand. And then I ended up just sort of staring at one particular area of grass. And after a while, each blade of grass began to liquefy and morph into a lake, a still lake that reflected the clouds above. And then I dove into it and woke up with a sudden jolt. And so if we look, this looks like, even though it's not, it is a little blurry, but I've tried to sharpen it up as much as I can. You can see the fence post, the road, the kind of fence around a paddock or something, and it almost looks like kind of clouds inside. And so that was the last little one I added in. Um, but whilst I'll just stop the share. But there's so much to talk about and unpack with that. But an extra thing I'd like to add, and I want to say this before I forget to say it, is that I have been studying about people who are blind and dreams.
Mm.
Because I I've been researching for an upcoming webinar called Water and Spirit, and I've been interviewing a lot of people who have had near-death experiences, um, and so I was wondering about what it is that is dreaming. What is it that's seeing in the dream? And that led me on to following this whole private group with all these comments about people who are blind. And do they dream? Like, how do they dream? And so it seemed fairly consistently that people that were born blind dream in the way that they sense the world. They dream in senses as opposed to seeing imagery. But people who were blinded later in life seem to have dreams like we do, like visual dreams. But the part that captured my attention was that there have been a small study on people that were born blind, who have never seen the world, who had either A, a near-death experience, or B, an out-of-body experience like astral travel or some kind of experience where they were out of their body. And those people can all describe what they saw. They described the world that they saw as they were in that spirit state.
Mm.
And I hadn't heard that information before. And I think that there's a lot there. And that may well be linked in with this dream time, this dream world that we all have. And maybe it's the spirit that's seeing. And what is sight? What are we seeing? Like, there's so many questions.
Well, and it would be absolutely fascinating, Veda, to do your crystallography with people that are blind and their dreams,
You
and to
know,
see
it's
if there's any difference between those who have never had sight, who have been blind from birth, versus those who do dream in images, but to see what the crystallography would say.
I would love to do that. I would love to do that. And I'm going to start making some inquiries as to how I might go about doing that. Obviously, people have to be open, and I don't know anyone personally who is blind from birth. So perhaps if anybody is listening to this and they know someone, or that's you, and you're open, I would be so happy to speak to you. I remember I used to live in Japan, and Japanese people would employ only blind people to come in to do the massages for clients, because
Mm.
they're so sensitive as to know exactly what someone's body needs. And I remember, top of the list, the best massage I ever had was from one of the blind people that they brought in for the hotel.
That makes so much sense. That's the language through which they communicate.
Yes.
But circling back to what you were just saying a minute ago, Veda, about the people that are blind that have had their out of body experiences, and their spirits have seen what's going on around them, and they dream in images. Do you think that some of the clarity of your crystallography with dreams is because dreams are often our spirits trying to guide us in what we're working through or what we need to be aware of? And our spirit then is in communication with the water, and the water is receiving those images from our spirits.
I think that's highly plausible. I've really, I mean, and then you look at spirit and consciousness, and I kind of tend to entwine those. So is this like a greater consciousness that we tap into? I think we're limited a little bit in the waking state because of our fear of death, of the physical body.
Mm.
Right. In dreams, we do have fears. Like, we all have nightmares. We've all had those experiences. We're running away from the monster, and we just can't run fast enough. Most of us have had some of these experiences. So there is fear in the dream time. It can happen. And so that then makes me wonder a little more about that question. It's like, okay, we're often working through things in our dream time that are subconscious. Someone once told me, and I always remembered it. She went to a psychologist, and the psychologist was talking about dreams. And apparently, when you dream about a house, that house represents you. And I've often gone back to the same house in my dreams, and now my house looks completely different than it used to. And it's because
Mm,
I've changed. And I think that there's also the ability to, but I want to circle back before I go to that, like about what you said. And that kind of, what you're saying resonates with me. And I also wonder, and there's a lot of things I just wonder, because I think that consciousness and water and spirit work together.
yeah.
Whether they're somehow different, but they work together, I think they work together. Whether water is what spirit or consciousness uses to for its movement, for its witness power, or whether they literally are just one and the same.
Mm,
Because we think about water, we tend to think of it just as a liquid. But the gaseous state is a very real state. And I've often said it on many podcasts that I think there are more than 4 states of water. We've identified a liquid, solid, gas, and gel or plasma. But within the ice state, there are over 300 types of ice. And within each
mm,
type of ice, there are multiple subtleties. So I think there are multiple subtleties within the state of gas or vapor. And I think that the spirit is directly connected to one of these states. Perhaps it's like a vibrational vapor that moves at such a high rate we don't see it yet, but we might be able to with new technology being built. I also think that it makes sense because this kind of witness or observer aspect of water, because we can all observe ourselves. Many of the people I've spoken to with near-death experiences, they say they have this sense of rising, which is what a gas does, and then looking down with no attachment to the body, more as an observer um, than anything else. And then they tend to move on to have other experiences. So I think there are probably multiple layers. And Robert Edward Grant, in one of the podcasts I was on with him, said mathematically there must be more stages to water. So making more inquiries there, I think that water is always in flow. And we, and something that Moses Hackman said, which is like the life cycle of water is the life cycle of the soul.
mm, mm.
And within that, there's no death because water doesn't die. It's always in one of its stages.
Well, and
Even,
isn't it true that at the time of death, people often see this vapor rising from the body, which would be the water vapor leaving, the spirit leaving?
yeah. Well, he also says that when a baby's born, the water breaks, the sacred water breaks, and we call it the waters. Her waters broke rather than water, stemming
Mm,
from the ancient way we used to talk about water as the waters rather than water. And then apparently, when you bury a body, the water also breaks through the body. So it breaks twice at birth and death to move again, to carry on, to simply change. One of the stages I love to do this, I encourage people to do it if they've never noticed it, is when you get a saucepan and you start to boil the water, before the water's bubbling away, just as it's before it bubbles, but it's getting hotter. And you look inside the pan, you'll notice these little wiggly worm things. They're like little tube-like things. They're just moving. And you can't miss them. They're very clear. They're very thin. But what we don't often realize is that those little wiggly worm things, they are little tubes that water has created so that the vapor can go through. So it transforms
mm,
from one stage to another. And as that happens, the water that's becoming a vapor would be seeing light. So it's kind of like light at the end of the tunnel of the water. But the water knows what's happening and it creates a way for it to transition. So it's extremely intelligent in the ways in which it makes space for itself to transition. I
And you're
think
in
there's
essence saying it remembers all of its forms. So
yes.
it is consciously working that transformational process. And what you're saying, Veda, about these other forms of water, it also reminds me of what you include in your book about Isabel Friend's work about how, if you think of hydrogen as the spirit of water and it fills the universe, and the stars are primarily hydrogen, so they're holding that information from water. But then she also talks about dark matter and dark energy as fluid intelligence, again, mostly hydrogen with hydrogen with protons and no electrons that are actually tiny black holes that therefore are able to hold that quantum intelligence of the cosmos and communicate with all that is.
I think that when you read that chapter, it might well change a lot of your views because she comes at it from multiple perspectives, scientific, um, cosmological, astrological, as well as from the perspective of water and hydrogen being the spirit. And I think that we have concepts about what is spirit even.
Yeah.
That you look at water and actually it's oxygen and hydrogen and they're two gases. It's amazing that we have liquid water on Earth.
Mm.
And I remember being interviewed by a man that gave me this suggestion, which I often share and quite like, is that the hydrogen, the two hydrogens, are feminine in the mode of levity, and the large oxygen is masculine in the mode of gravity, and together they create liquid water on Earth.
Mm. Amazing. So that's where
But
the spirit of water manifests in the body of water with that gravitational pull of the oxygen.
yeah, well, I've also been introduced relatively recently to a man by the name of Hans, and he's been working with something called ITC photos for many, many, many years. And I remember seeing someone share one once, and I didn't believe it was real. I thought if someone had just made it up, and it was so realistic that I'm like, oh, this maybe isn't real. And but I was curious enough years later, recently, to investigate for myself and go, well, who am I to say what's real or not real? Sometimes people think my photos aren't real, so maybe I need to go and have a look. And so I started to look into his website. And my God, it's one of the biggest, most in-depth websites I've ever come across. And the images are amazing. So many people have heard over the many years the Egyptians and the Greeks used a method of water divining by looking into water in bowls.
Mhm.
And even Nostradamus did that.
Mhm.
It's called scything or something like that,
And the
scrying
Druids did that.
druids. And so, what are we looking at? Even years ago when I had my other cat, Jiva, and Jiva would play with me when I was doing crystallography, and he was always very curious. So I'd often have like petri dishes of water on the bench top, but I sometimes one time I put it down on the ground for him to have a look at because he was just curious, and I thought, well, maybe he'll inspire the water somehow. But every time I put the glass of water, the petri dish of water, down on the ground for Jiva the cat, he would try to get something out of it. He saw something in it, and his little paw was trying to grab it out. And
Interesting.
I always thought, he sees something in there. I just don't see it. So going from that concept, these ITC photos are where essentially they have a silver cup or bowl, or they have a clear bowl with aluminum foil underneath it, so it kind of creates a silver bottom. And then they have light source from one side, and then they set up a camera so it takes 1 to 4 photos a second. And they get a spatula and they move the water so the water's moving, and they take the photos. It's as simple as that. And the photographs are what Hans believes to be of spirits in the water revealing themselves, as well as even animals. They see like birds and dogs. There's so many pictures in his website. But the faces are almost unnerving because they look so real. And he's gone into a lot of science about this, trying to explain what's happening. What's curious is that the faces that people capture don't seem to have any relevance to them personally. So they are just faces. But what Hans has managed to do is to capture such clear imagery of certain faces and actually trace those faces back to people who lived in the past, in the 18th century or 17th, where there are photos still to depict them, and the early 19th century. So there, he was able to identify a couple of people from these pictures in water moving.
Extraordinary. Do you have some of those images, Veda?
Let me just get this up for you, and I will show you immediately. So I know that I'm
And
just
it so
coming.
shows that water is not just reflecting back our thoughts or our experience, but it is often illuminating us with something that we need to be aware of, whether it's the dream that you forgot or these spirit beings that may be inhabiting our space with us.
Absolutely. Right, I've got it ready to go. Okay, so I've explained already
Wow.
how he does it, but these are some other people's work that learnt his work. His website is up here. His name is Hans Kenneth, and ITC stands for Instrumental Transcommunication. And these are the images, just 3 out of hundreds that he has on there. And I would add that I've often connected the practice of reading tea leaves in coffee as being that the water moves the leaves into form or the coffee into form.
Mm, mm. That makes so much sense.
And that's been around a very, very long time. So, and then I kind of don't want to forget to talk about the Biggleson brothers.
Yes, let's
I know
bring
you've
them in too.
heard of that. So I'd like to talk about that. Let me just get that up for you. And now let's see. Come out of here. Thank you. 153.
This is all extraordinary.
And these are all in the book. So I'm going to talk to you first about these guys and then share the pictures. So I had to add them in my book. I had to add Hans in there. I had to add the Biggleston brothers in there. Their father was a surgeon, an eye surgeon, and also served as a surgeon in the war, and was studying blood, live blood samples down the microscope. And I'll read from how they've written it up so that I don't get it wrong. But what they're looking at, because they said that the red blood cells were too big, these images, sorry, were too big to be red blood cells, that they assumed or guessed, or now it seems know, that they are actually holographic images relative to the body that they're seeing in the blood. And I'll read how they explain that, but I'll show some pictures. So what they were seeing was imagery relative to the body, in that person's body. So in one particular situation, they had a broken femur that they saw in these holographic blood images. And it's very clear. I mean, you can actually look at it and liken it and see how much they look like actual body parts and organs. And sorry, I'll just turn that down. And so this was a broken femur, and this person actually broke their femur 1 month after They'd taken the water sample, the blood sample, sorry. And then there was someone with a brain injury, and you can see the brain. And then there's someone who had an issue with the leg, and there's a leg, and then there's the foot. And I'm thinking, how can you see all this in a little bit of blood under a microscope? But what they're doing is really extraordinary, and they have so many, many, many images. So let me share what they look like. And then we'll go into their explanation as to how it works. Okay. So these are a selection of images. So here's the broken femur here. And this one is an image of an injury to the brain. And this is an image of a kidney that had atrophied. And here's that leg and foot. Now let's just look at the detail in this leg and foot over here. I mean,
Amazing.
amazing, right? So
You can see the nerves and the veins and arteries. It's incredible.
it's really incredible. So, so here is where I'm talking about it. So how does it work? So what they say is when a structure in the terrain is distressed, it changes its frequency. And this is the interference field. The body's background energy field or biological hum becomes a reference energy source. The two fields produce the basic conditions required for a hologram. The hologram appears when a beam of light is split in two and reflected onto a single photographic plate. The blood with its own energy field acts as a photographic plate to record a holographic image of the distressed structure.
And that it's not based on time because the broken femur, was actually perceiving what was to come as opposed to what was present or from the past.
Yes. And I've seen that in my work too, where I see that water is revealing things that are about to happen. And I find that out because they happen. So when I put my thumb into the water and removed it, I saw an image of the thumb and the nail appear, but in the image of the ice, the nail had a chip in it, and I chipped my nail in exactly that same place 3 hours later. And then one time I had just invited to share water to share whatever it wanted. And I saw this obelisk in the ice. And I was looking around for any obelisks. I'm like, I don't see anything. And then I was like, okay, well, we'll just wait and see what happens. And then a few hours later, my friend came over and she'd been to the crystal shop and she'd bought a crystal in the shape of an obelisk. And she said, have you seen something like this before? And I showed her the photo and she was like, what? And so and even I saw the shape of a very clear ship with a mast and sails, and everything was very clear. And I watched a show later on, and it wasn't all about ships. It was actually about some other thing about the Earth. And so when I went through, I had to stop it. I'm like, I've seen that picture of a ship before. And I'm like, screenshot it and I put it beside. I'm like, oh my God, that's that. Why did water show me that? What do I need to know about that ship? Which I probably never see in my life. But there are certain things we get shown. We don't always know why. But in the Biggleson brothers, then it's obvious why. I mean, it was like water, the blood or the water in the blood was reading the potential of the problem, not just the potential of the best outcome. So that was also something to think about, I guess.
So, in all these different situations, it seems like water can be revealing what it is we need to bring into our consciousness, what it is that we're needing to be aware of. It's almost like the spirit of water is trying to guide us in our own evolution of consciousness, but in an active way. It's not passively reflecting our thoughts and consciousness, it's communicating to us.
Yeah. And it's water communicating with itself.
Ah, beautifully said. That's right, because we're 99% water at the molecular level.
And I think when you start thinking in those terms, it's water everywhere, water in the air, water in every body of life, water. And I mean, it's no coincidence that even in our language, that's a body of water. That's the head waters. That's the mouth of the water. Mouth, the more, we have these terms for it as a living being, even in language. Um, and then you kind of consider if it wasn't for the skin, we would relate ourselves so much more to the rivers and tributaries, to the waterfalls, to the
Mm.
lakes, to all of these shapes and forms of water that we see outside. And I think that water and trees have a great deal in common. The more I study water and trees, the more I think that there is something very, very special there. The fact that I see seeds show up so often within the ancient mysteries questions that I ask about, I actually think that wood is possibly the most rare thing in the universe because we don't see trees on other planets. There probably are in some other universe. But we see in some planets they're fully water. Some planets are entire water planets.
Mm. Mhm.
And we go, well, life could be inside of those and this and this and this. But where are we seeing trees? And so there was something that I'm sharing in one of my Ancient Mysteries webinars, which Rudolf Steiner talked about, and also from the Lemurian scrolls. There's something called the Lemurian scrolls, where they talked about these other beings that came and sprinkled seeds,
Mm.
seeds across the land. And these seeds were the most sacred thing that they owned because they represented wood. They represented
Mm.
trees. And trees and water have this incredible intimate relationship. If you ever look at a big tree and then we have a tree that we like to go and visit, and it's right on the beach. And so it's a big Pahutakawa tree. And the water, there's a stream that runs right past that tree and it goes out into the sea. So you see that the actual stream takes on the exact form of the tree as it branches out into the ocean. And you look at the way that when you go to a beach, you see all the waveforms, that the way that, not the waveforms, but the way the water's moved the sand. And it looks like the trunk, the tree roots and the tree branches. And then you kind of look at when water freezes. Many people would have seen the
Mhm.
bubble freezing. You always are going to see ferns. You see
Yes.
ferns forming. You see things that look like trees. And this is interesting because there you have these relationships between water and what Moses Hackman would call, he said that we are like walking trees and that we've managed to, like, we have this trunk, we have like this head full of ideas, we have the legs, which are kind of like the roots that are just separated and moving, and the water comes up through us. And when we see a leaf, when it falls off a tree and it changes color, and then it kind of crumples and it becomes like it doesn't have the water in it anymore. The water has moved on.
Mm.
And then the leaf goes back to the earth, and it will be hydrated once more as dirt, and help to grow and form and be part of the system to create. So water itself is always moving. And you think about what it is to be a living thing. A lot of science will say that it means that there's procreation must happen. It must grow. Well, every time someone gets pregnant, the woman's amniotic fluid grows with the baby grows, and the reason for that is because the fluid's also growing, and,
Mm.
and it is becoming more and more, um, evolved. And so the water is growing itself, it's birthing itself, it is constantly upgrading itself and learning. what's the point of having water memory, which is something that we talk about a lot in my world. People talk about water having this memory. Well, what's the point of having memory if you can't learn from it? And what we see is water learning or evolving to and adapting to the environment. And one of the things that the late, I'm sorry to say, late Jonathan Butts, he recently passed
Mm.
unexpectedly. And the last thing I don't know if it's the last thing he did, but he'd just finished writing a chapter for my book, whereas he was working with water in a very specific vapor stage where it is actually looks just like fire and it can cut through steel. It can cut through things at a very high temperature, but it's using implosion rather than explosion, and it's literally water. So we tend to pull apart the elements and say there's earth, there's water, there's air, there's fire, but water is also fire. It's also all those things can be fire.
Well, if
And
you
so
think of the sun being hydrogen, the spirit of water, it's fire.
that's right. That's right.
I
And
mean,
then we,
if this is just mind blowing what you're saying, and I just want to circle back a moment to the trees because that's so extraordinary that so many ancient wisdom traditions talk about the tree of life or the tree of knowledge or the world tree, and
it's
the
wonderful.
way in which the tree also is so symbolic of our connection to the earth, but then our connection to the sky and all that is, and bridging that. And in essence, it feels like what you're saying is, and I know you have a quote that just it moves me profoundly about water as God consciousness. That in essence, we can come back into unity consciousness when we realize that everything is water. Everything is of water's consciousness and its own evolutionary journey in us and through us.
Through us. It never ends. I
Never
think
dies.
it dies. I sum the water and God chapter up um, with two things. Well, really, well, there's a water and spirit chapter where there's something relative, and then there's one in which is a beautiful little quote that I've used from someone who reached out to me, a parent, a mum, and her daughter had fallen into a pool in their pool, and I think had briefly drowned, like very briefly, and the father brought her out, resuscitated her, and she came around very quickly. And then out of her mouth, she said, God is in the water and he's big.
Mm, 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 mm.
It's like, oh, out of the
Wow.
mouth, babes. And then this one lady in the water and spirit chapter, she is wanting to connect back to her mum who had passed away. And she said, like, can you please, tell me where my mum is? Is she okay? And she was very new to doing the crystallography, and she was using a Pyrex baking tray, which I recommend if you don't have a dish. The glass sort of baking tray does take longer, it's a bit more. But anyway, she was like, "Oh, I don't see anything." And then she took a few photos and she went back through the photos and she saw three letters that were very clear that I've shared in the book, and she's allowed me to. God. And so there's something there. There's something in the water.
Well, I know we're going to need to stop in a moment, but this is just so paradigm shifting and mind blowing and so profound. And I feel like it is your work and your communication with, and I would say communion with water, because you're in relationship with water. You're not viewing it as either a resource or an object, but as living consciousness. And that it is your work and what you're bringing forward with that consciousness of water is guiding us to remember more deeply who we are and how we're interconnected with all that is and how we are birthed from the sea of cosmic consciousness. We're
Mhm.
just a drop, an expression of that.
Yeah. And I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. I think that whenever I do talk with you, I always feel like you understand my perspective so well.
Mm.
And many people, um, they understand parts of it. But whenever I speak to you, I always feel like you totally understand where I'm coming from, and you of everybody else, there really you send me the most relative information that helps me springboard into the next thing and the next thing. And I'm very grateful for that because I am constantly going down tributaries with water all the time. And I don't think that there'll ever come a time where it gets old or boring because there's constantly something to feel, not just learn.
Yes, well said. To feel and experience.
Yeah.
Ah, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing this with us, Veda. And I'm so excited and want people to really keep an eye out for the release of your book, The Living Language of Water. And
I've
I
got like
re
but I printed it. Was only my proof. I printed it out for like to check for spelling mistakes. So it's a big book. And this bit here is actually the ice imagery from a song called Water Poem by Ram Dass. And I just love the beautiful hexagon. So there's over 1,500 photos in the book.
and I
And
can attest to the fact it's a brilliant and beautiful book. It is extraordinary. And this will come out before your webinar March 16th in part of the world, March 17th where you are, Ancient Mysteries and Water, which I'm honored to be a part of.
I can't wait to
And,
hear your presentation.
and then say a little bit more about your one in July, because I think that one is going to be amazing.
Well, I'm about to put it up in the next couple of days to be available to book, so it might be perfect timing for when this comes out. It's called Water and Spirit, and it might even have to go for 2 days because I have so many people speaking, but I am having people who have had near-death experiences who are sharing their stories with us. Even have someone whose son has recorded um, his past life memories for us that he's 15 now, so he was aware and able to share about his experiences. He is the sweetest boy. Parents talking about how their children remember lives before. I'm sharing my own personal story about my experiences with my car accident and my son, and my work with water and my mum, my daughter's story about bats,
Ah, yes.
why she loves bats so much, uh,
Yes.
and and many, many more. I also have I've never done this before, so this water and spirit one's going to be quite new for me. I've never done this where I've invited someone who's a psychic medium who is pretty well known and followed my work. And he talks a lot about quantum entanglement and quantum physics, trying to explain some of it from a different perspective and what his gift is. And he seems to me personally to be the real deal. And what's fun is that he is actually a Kiwi like me, a New Zealander. We call ourselves Kiwis. Um, and but he lives overseas. So he's coming back to see his nana this month. And so he was saying that we could catch up and he could connect to someone in my field and we'll have some water there and we'll invite to see what might happen, if any messages in the ice might happen, and we'll film it and we'll share it. And he's just talking from his perspective, like what he thinks happens with spirits after they pass on. And and I would suggest that, the people that are speaking, they're speaking very vulnerably. Some people, they've barely ever spoken about their experiences before. So I think it's a big deal for them that they are talking. One lady has had 7 near-death experiences,
Mm.
and every single one is absolutely extraordinary. And yeah, when we're talking to people who, one lady, she was on the news in America actually, and she was clinically dead for over 90 minutes. And one lady says that she woke up in the morgue 9 hours after being dead, and her mother was signing the death certificate. So we, yeah, I mean, there's a lot there, and it really makes you really wonder what is the nature of this death we call death. And everyone's had some experiences. So, one lady, she went down into the water, and she said that she met with her guides in this beautiful blue ocean. She said it kept getting more and more blue with colors of blue she can't even explain. And then there's a beautiful African belief system. And I'm going to share a little video on that webinar about it. And they say, and this is from one tribe, I think, saying that the West says that heaven is up. But and they're saying that actually it's diving back into the belly of the womb of water is where we go,
Mm,
my
mm,
children.
mm, mm.
And then she says that then if you stay there and you meet all your relatives and you be with them until there comes a time when your new mother will drink the water back, and that is you going back into the belly. And I think it's so beautiful. It's just a totally different perspective from what we're sort of taught. And this is a very non-judgmental, it has to be a very non-judgmental webinar. This is not for people to come in and share what they think is wrong or right or this or this. This is a very, very supportive and beautiful space that we're creating that I think will take a lot of fear away from people because these people are also inspiring and they brought gifts back to share with the world. One particular lady I'm thinking of, and she is also going to be in the Ancient Mysteries webinar, but I don't want to ruin it. So, but she came back with a gift of being able to help people remember their lives before. And just as a teaser, she says that during COVID, she was still seeing people, and there was one common thread that they kept bringing up about Atlantis relative to the whole COVID period.
And we could talk for a whole hour about that. I
Yeah.
mean, it's so extraordinary. And I just want to say this work that you're doing is ever expanding and is really opening our awareness more and more fully of not only the nature of water, but of consciousness. And in your Water and Spirit webinar, what is the meaning of death? And it's interesting in your Ancient Mysteries webinar coming up this weekend, many of us will be weaving in wisdom from ancient Egypt. And I find it very interesting that in ancient Egypt, there was no word for death.
Mm.
They called it westing, that you would go to the west and like the sun disappears at the time of sunset, but then rises again in the east. That's the journey of the soul, just in the transformation, but there is no death. So, and it feels like water teaches us that, shows us that.
Yeah. Oh, that's I've got a lot of goosebumps from this conversation we've had.
Well, thank you so much for being in this conversation and for the work that you're doing, Veda.
Oh,
Mm.
it's my pleasure. It's always a pleasure and honor.
And thank you to all you who are listening and participating in this process. Blessings to all of you.